Hello and welcome to World and Union Balls.ie's weekly rugby show with me, Mick McCarthy, alongside, as always, Maurice Brosnan. We've got a packed show for you today because we are just a week out from the return of the Six Nations. Ireland versus France will take place next Sunday in the Aviva Stadium, but there's a lot of rugby news happening outside of the game itself over the last couple of days, because World Rugby have announced their plans for a World Rugby League. We're going to talk to New Zealand rugby writer Paul Baines, who's been writing about this, about what exactly is the reasoning for it. Does it all come down to money? Hint, yes. And is that money enough to actually do what World Rugby really wanted to do? So a very interesting topic. We'll talk to Paul in just a few minutes. Lots more as well. We'll talk a little bit about how the Irish teams got on in the Pro 14 over the weekend, and we will pick our team pick our Ireland team for the France game. Have you any kind of surprises without spoiling it in there?
Yeah,
Two surprises. Okay, cool. This is again the team that Morris would like to see Joe Schmidt pick,
yeah.
not a prediction of what the team will be when it is named on Friday, I presume. Paul Baines, we're going to talk to him in a few minutes. We're going to set this up because people like me, who I'm reading it a little bit here and there, and all I'm seeing is the outrage. It's like I missed the day one of the story.
Yeah.
What exactly is this proposed World League?
So I guess, to go back to the very start, World Rugby has always spoken about the idea that international rugby probably isn't as profitable as it needs to be. So you've seen cases in Australia, definitely, probably South Africa as well, New Zealand to a certain extent, where they're concerned about the financial revenue that they have. Some of them are running at massive deficits, and they're trying to look at ways they can address this. So one of the main problems that this leaked in the New Zealand Herald last Thursday, which is your first problem, that you don't have any clarity around it. That's what happens if you have a meeting, you don't issue any proposals, or you try and keep it to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
and this is why World Rugby has since called an emergency meeting, and exactly. Bill Beaumont is kind of out doing a PR exercise trying to explain it to everybody properly. Yeah.
So essentially the proposal was that after the 2020 World Cup, that it would become a 12-tournament ring-fenced World League where you would have games played in November, June, July. You would get rid of November internationals and the June tests, the summer tests. The Six Nations would still go on. It would have something to do in terms of your ranking within this tournament. But for the sake of clarity, it's Six Nation teams, it's the Rugby Championship, and it's USA and Japan. That's the 12 that they're going to include in that. Yeah. So the biggest flaw within that 12, straight off the bat, is the fact that you're omitting Pacific Island, all three Pacific Island nations, including somebody like Fiji, who's ranked above, they're in the top 10 right now. They just beat France last year. They aren't included. They probably have more potential rugby-wise compared to somebody like USA, who just lost Argentina last week, to Uruguay last week. But the USA, and this is as you pretty much, this is the big thing. USA is way bigger commercially, and that's why Japan has
that potential as well.
Yeah, exactly. So there's huge proposals there. So the idea is that of this, they think that we could be able to generate an extra 9 million. That's just through broadcasting. So that would come back and help out of these individual nations. But in terms of, if you were to make a hierarchy of issues with this, in terms of player welfare wise, in terms of the promotion of rugby, and not only the promotion is kind of a weird bit, but in terms of the preservation, you will preserve a certain tier, but you will omit countries who will eventually lose focus, and because they're losing focus, the national interest will dwindle, and if it dwindles, the game becomes weaker. That's just a fact. Yeah. So the sheer amount of flaws. Now, they have come out since, in certain areas, Brett Gosper has come out and said this wasn't, some of the leaks were inaccurate, and that they were looking at maybe inclusions based off merit, and they've called, as you mentioned, they've called an emergency meeting based off that. But from a multivariate, it's not just down to one factor. There's several reasons why this is a really kind of poorly laid out and kind of detrimental move.
Before we kind of talk about some of the other problems, because there's serious issues, and we'll talk about the Pacific Nations, right? Specifically. Pacific Nations, specifically. I said it right. I'm proud of myself. Okay. What would be the tournament? So it's 12 teams played over the course of 2 windows in a year. You don't play 11 games.
No, so you would play half the teams. So you were talking about,
is there a final or something?
Exactly. Okay. So what that potentially sets up, because of that, is that you could have 5 games in November back to back, including a semi-final and a final, if it was to come to that. That's where player welfare has been. So Johnny Sexton, Owen Farrell and Kinread all came out immediately against this.
Yeah, they're representing the union of rugby players.
Exactly. So their concern primarily is down to player welfare. So I mean, as Kieran Reid outlined, there's possible two outcomes from this. Either you get squads bloated to 50 odd people to, essentially be able to field for this respectively, or the alternative is that you get players with way less quality games because players are just absolutely fatigued after. So the Six Nations still exist, the Rugby Championship still exists, the World Cup still exists, and the lines still exist within all of this. You're just adding this in, more competitive games on top of that. I to be honest, I don't see how you shoehorn the lines in.
The lines look like,
I think the World Cup becomes a farce, really. What's the point in that if you've got the 12 best nations already playing every single year? Does the World Cup become kind of a byproduct where it doesn't really matter, which is the likely scenario, especially if it's that old thing, follow the money. Like, if the World Rugby League, as it was proposed, was to become this commercial giant that they hope it would be, it would dwarf everything else. That's just the manner of the games. And I think the people who really should be paid heed to, like the Georgian rugby president came out on yesterday, and he was really forceful in. So some of it maybe I wonder about his language. Like, he talked about a lot of staring down their noses and this kind of retrograde elites that have made this move. But he did say that in 2016 they were promised that they would play a tier 1 nation twice a year. So between 2007 and 2011, between 2011 and 2017, they played 5 times ever, played a tier 1 nation. So they were promised, because that's the only way you're going to grow the game is through money, and the only way you can grow the money or develop money is games. That's what Georgia need. So, but Georgia were promised one, and one of those games would be at home. And now a proposal is leaked where after 2020 they would get no games against tier 1 nations, and the consequence of that, what it would do for them. So that's something that viewers should pay attention to, because he's also promised that the tier 2 nations as a unity will issue a joint statement, which would be very interesting,
and could possibly come out with a legal challenge, because I do question. They did this in cricket, right? So I might ask Paul a little bit about this, the ICC Champions Trophy that came out, which basically was the worry was it would make the World Cup kind of redundant, and they're doing everything in their power in the World Cup to keep the Irelands of the world out as well. But that was challenged. But to have this just set tournament every year or 2 years or whatever, where it doesn't matter whether you're any good or not, it's the big money countries are going to be in there, So that was done. But so there is precedent there in sport, but I do wonder if, is there anything you can do as a legal challenge? If Fiji are better than the USA, how can this be legal?
Forced on them.
And I'm not 100% sure on this, but World Rugby are based in Ireland, and I wonder, does this ultimately come under Irish law? And I would wonder about Irish monopoly law and how this works. And it's actually it's something we might actually have a look at even and have an answer for you on next week.
But on the Ireland perspective in this, so Irish players have come out and spoken against this from a player welfare perspective. They're concerned, they're in the bubble. Their concern is never going to be on the development of the game or on tier 2 nations or lower tier nations, and for that matter. They're totally entitled to that. But Irish rugby itself, Irish rugby has played one lower tier nation in the last 3 years. They've little interest in this as others. It's been reported that the Six Nations were the union that were against the idea of relegation and promotion, that they were the idea of ring fences, like the Six Nations. It's like, don't forget, Benjamin Modell, who's the head of the Six Nations, the chief executive on February, on the day, his first media appearance after he took the chief executive role, the first thing he said was, we're happy with what we have, and he shot down the idea of a Georgia playoff straight away. So he was in, their idea or their motivation is absolutely not to grow the game, and that is ultimately that's what it's going to come down to. Which is why it's so farcical to cut off the way the game that they want to.
But it's also we'll talk specifically to Paul about the money, okay, because that is obviously the reason for doing this. But as we will talk about, money isn't even life changing. It ultimately is coming to possibly a power grab between the unions and international rugby versus the money and the control that's in club rugby at the moment, and that's understandable. But what I don't understand is how an organisation like World Rugby can ever justify cutting off potential areas of growth in the game. And if you have Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, whoever it might be, Georgia, a really good example, Uruguay have been really, really strong on this as a growing country. But even some of the European countries, that are trying to kind of make that breakthrough, like Spain and Germany, they are basically being told, there's no room for you here. I don't care what you do.
Yeah.
You know, and actually, it's not about Germany and Spain, because room would be made for them if they came through. It's about the countries that can never develop into a commercial
Giant.
entity.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't mean it. This sounds so naive and pathetic, but this is sport. It's World Rugby is a non-profit organisation that runs a sport. How can it justify saying we have our 12, nobody else is welcome?
And on top of that, by the way,
I just want to interrupt and bring back cricket again, because I worked on Off the Ball. We were part of campaigns about getting unfairness and letting Ireland in, and suddenly everybody in the country was a massive cricket fan, even though they don't watch it normally, because fair is fair and this team were good enough, and we were on our high horse about it. And now suddenly the shoe's on the other foot, and we're part of this elite keeping people out, and it's really pathetic. Like,
and so on that's a really important theme. I think if for any rugby fans out there, like the message, the people that you should be listening to this isn't World Rugby scrambling and talking about trying to put out fires. It's people like Daniel Leo, he's suggested that a strike should be on the cards for the World Cup.
He's a Samoan player,
former Samoan rugby player. Yeah,
who I think we're going to be talking to
hope, yeah. So we'll like, ideally we will definitely try and represent their voices and try and get some of those, because the point they're making is that this will kill their game. Like, already they're being pillaged by other nations who come in at the schools level and attract them abroad because they don't have the economy or the resources to keep them at home. And now can you imagine the players that do persevere, who want to represent their country internationally, won't even have a chance to do it at any sort of competitive level, any sort of fair level? Like, these are teams who'll be dwindling, holding out for a World Cup every 4 years.
Yeah.
So the consequence of that is you'll get situations where it'll be like France would play New Zealand and it'll be Pacific Islanders playing against Pacific Islanders representing both, because they weren't given any sort of chance within their own right.
You could argue they're not getting much of a chance anyway, but it's kind of 1 or 2 games a year, and that's not good enough. It's not even it's that's been taken away. It's not even just that. It's so much so that it's not the priority to improve it.
Yeah.
You know, in any way. So look, I mean, there's a lot of. John, I will ask you a straightforward question. The players are against it. It's incredibly unfair on everybody involved. What's the constituency for it? Because I don't think we can. I'm giving out about, like, you know, Ireland being a part of this, but I don't think Irish fans are a part of this. I don't think there's any real desire for it. I think they're happy enough with the kind of international structure as it is. So there must be some positives to this. I mean, like, would it be a good tournament from your sport
point
of view?
There are positives in theory. There are positives to the idea of making World Rugby more competitive. If you get rid of like, some of these games can feel like friendlies in terms of the test windows. So if you could increase that kind of competition, you would probably increase the entertainment value. You get more chances to see Ireland play South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. I mean, all that stuff is there's I mean, to a certain extent, there's many parts of that. My fear, and I think this is definitely going to happen, is it'll dilute everything else. So the Six Nations becomes less of a relevance.
I was literally about to say the same thing. Yeah.
Like, just as a final point on this, there's also a fact that right now World Rugby are scrambling to kind of cover their highs on this. At the same time, last weekend, Pat Lambie spoke about the absolute horror he went through for 3 years because of concussion protocols. Dupree, the Montpellier South African, spoke about not being able to. He was did an interview with the Sunday Times on Sunday where he spoke about his abuse of painkillers. He wasn't able to drive to training without cramping up his arm under pillows. He'd painkillers. He'd pins and needles through his fingers, but he still played. And instead of trying to combat real serious issues in what is an inherently dangerous game, they're trying to make more money for it.
And 5 test matches in a row in November, which is just
obscene.
Yeah, like impossible, really. Yeah. You see what the Six Nations does with 5 and 7 weeks, and you know it's borderline impossible. Look, we'll talk more about it with Paul Baines, as said, New Zealand rugby writer, in a couple of minutes. Briefly on this weekend, Ulster had a good win against the Dragons. Leinster, not incredibly impressive against the Cheetahs, 19-7 the RDS. But the 2 results I wanted to stop on: Connacht 46, the Ospreys 5, and the Scarlets 10, Munster 6, played in the most unbelievable. You thought, like, rugby's more able for it than GEA is, but that was unplayable on Saturday. But Scarlets were bloody delighted with that result. Like, they were absolutely, the celebrations at the end, like as if they just won a Heineken Cup quarter-final or something. But Munster could have done with that win for home semi-final. Yeah,
definitely. And I suppose it's kind of an unfair point to make, and I know people have kind of batted our eyelids when we said this before, but Munster really do need to organise some sort of attacking framework because it's just not there at the minute. And
too many low-scoring games like that.
But even a bit like this really simple stuff like the knock on at the end. I was kind of looking at that and I was wondering, was that an issue? Like, was it a wrong play call? And it's you're looking beyond that. Like, it's the idea that when they're coming around the corner, they're always predictable about everything. It's one platform. The only time they did come close to scoring the try was when Kevin O'Byrne was pulled for the TMO pulled it off because he was obstructing, but it was from a maul, from a line-out, which is just typical because they don't seem to have enough expansion with them. I know the conditions don't help that, but
they were really bad conditions.
Absolutely, you know, but yeah. I would argue that is part of a overall team that made it slightly lacking. The Connacht result is incredible. We've championed Connacht, or I've certainly championed Connacht a lot on this show, but
it's funny when Connacht have a result like that, the first thing you see is conversations in Wales about the future of the Ospreys, and I'm not saying they're not justified. It's like Connacht you get a reputation almost, and it's like getting a hammering off Connacht is the final straw.
Yeah,
you know, but they're good enough to give you a hammering now. Like, and that wasn't always the case.
Absolutely, and especially if you watch the style, like the brand of rugby they can play. A couple of weeks ago I kind of made a point about Jack Carty becoming this kind of kicking off the cuff, and I didn't mean to like box him off as being just that, because as you saw the week, I know he wasn't playing at the weekend. Kyle Goodwin stood in at 10, but even the try where Peter Robb makes the break through the centre, and this it's such a gorgeous offload to Farrell who feeds after Merriman. Like it's back to the kind of the Pat Lam-esque rugby that sometimes it's like, oh, they're totally different, but at times they show their capabilities to still do both, and that's. Like, as we keep going back to it, that's such a strength of Irish rugby that all of those Irish players who were involved in the Irish camp come back, like Caelan Blade. Jack Carty wasn't playing, but he'll probably be on the bench this weekend. Ultan Dillane and Quinn Rue, I thought were both really, really good. Tom Farrell looks, I mean, whatever it is about the kind of national recognition he's finally getting, it seems to be thriving under it. Like that is a major strength. It's something that I think is kind of important to see, and maybe that's something that like Munster could maybe expect their second tier players to start kind of carrying the slack the way that Connacht seems to be able to do.
Yeah. Are you confident they can continue it on after the break?
I would. Yeah, I mean, there's no justifiable reason to say that they can't. Like their frameworks, in terms of their ability to keep squads fit and healthy, like that's major, and that's, you know, a lot of that is just down to luck, but it's still standing to them.
It's coming at a bad time though, isn't it? They could, like, their confidence would be so high. They don't want 3 weeks without a game now.
Yeah, I know.
But it's a pity in some ways. But did you see a couple of weeks ago there was a game, I think Spain were in it, was a tier 2 international anyway, where there was a 99-yard kick to touch from the try line to the end, and I remember the commentary saying you'll never see another kick like this again in rugby, and then we saw it again in the Connacht match. I don't think it was quite 99 yards this time, but not too far off it.
But like, and the versatility of people like Kyle Goodwin has been a major plus this year. Like, he's a guy when particularly in the Challenge Cup, he constantly stood in. So he stood in at like 12, 13. He stood in the wing at one stage. He was playing at 10 at the weekend. That's kind of like, again, just going back to another major strength of rugby. And it's about, like, sometimes I wonder about this in regards to Munster. Like Connacht are a team that really thrive at keeping it simple when they have to, and I think it's something that we'll kind of see a return to in rugby. I watched the Crusaders game on Saturday, and Crusaders in the second half noticed that the Reds weren't jumping in the lineout. So after the next two lineouts, they scored a try off one of them. They just didn't put up a jumper, just threw it straight in, because if they weren't going to compete against it, why exert energy trying to get a lifter up into the air? So just a really simple thing, and then therefore your maul forms quicker. So that's how they scored their try. Just didn't put up a jumper, just threw it, because if Reds weren't going to challenge. And sometimes I wonder, are teams guilty of kind of overcomplicating it?
Are we thinking on our feet? And I suppose you immediately at this time of year think about the Irish team. And
exactly.
The conversation we'll have in a few minutes. We'll talk about the Ireland match against France at the weekend. We'll talk about the other Six Nations games. But I do want to turn back to the proposed World League just for a few minutes. I'm delighted to say that we've got Paul Baines. He's at Driving Mall on Twitter. You might have seen some of his stuff. He's a rugby writer in New Zealand, and he's written a brilliant piece called "Is the World League Worth It?" on therunnersports.com. Paul, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to join you.
Well, thanks for being with us, because this is something that me and Maurice have got very vexed about already, and people will have listened to us, and you know we're spouting all kinds of bile about this proposal. What was your thoughts on it when you seen it come out in the New Zealand Herald last week?
It's pretty much the same as I think what a lot of people have said is there has to be promotion relegation. We can't be ring fencing. So that was bad, which immediately jumps out. You've then got the kind of how they're going to fit extra games in, because that's going to around if they're going to have it finishing in November, and they want to have playoffs, and they're going to have a couple of extra weekends into the European club season, which is going to cause some nice issues. And then there's player welfare. Admittedly, Johnny Sexton's come out and talked about the 5 games back to back, but then there's also the games when they come down to play the Southern Hemisphere. If you're going to try and play Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, the amount of travel is an awful lot more than playing Wales, Scotland, Ireland in 3 weekends. So those are the 3 things that jumped out at me. And then I had a quick dig in to say, okay, look, do the numbers add up anyway? Is this really going to solve things?
Yeah, so that's ultimately the nub of your piece, which is really what we're reading. We'll tweet out a link to it. As I said, it's on therunnersports.com. But like, it's aside from, World Rugby will eventually come out with a proposal, be it this or be it something else, and it will be about having competitive games and not friendlies, and that'll be the headline. But ultimately, we all know that this comes down to money, and it comes down to the fact that rugby unions, as you point out, the sponsorship deal for the Six Nations is a lot lower than it was the previous one. The New Zealand, South Africa and Australia look like they're going to be running losses and really struggling financially after the next World Cup. This all comes down to the fact that international rugby and the rugby unions, as opposed to the clubs, need to generate more money. But you've dug into that a little bit and found out that really the amount of money they're getting from this new proposal isn't really going to make all that much difference.
No, I don't think so. I mean, well, again, it comes down to everything we've heard so far, let's be honest, is rumour and hearsay. So if you read some articles, it's between $10 and $14 million. Now, is that New Zealand dollars? Is that USA dollars? Is that whatever? So the initial article I read was New Zealand dollars. So I've worked off that basically. And at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is about the same amount of money as the salary cap of one Gallagher Premiership team. Now, the problem with that is there's 12 Gallagher Premiership teams and there's 14 teams over in France, plus there's the Pro Div 2, which pays pretty decent wages as well. So it is really adding the salary cap of one team to every union going to change their world. Now, it's going to change the world of someone like Fiji. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that's going to double or triple their revenue. But for New Zealand, that's much more like a 5% difference, which isn't really that much.
What do you think it says about the unions themselves that it seems to be, particularly the Six Nations, that it seems to be the idea that they're a lot more pushing for this now compared to, say, when the initial proposal was coming out in 2016, that something was going to happen after the 2020 World Cup?
I think that it is interesting about the sponsorship deal in the Six Nations is now way down. But it's not just there, is it? You've also got the European Rugby Champions Cup the European Rugby Champions Cup was supposed to have was it 3 or 5 sponsors, something like that, and they've only got one, and you can't imagine that one is paying anywhere near top dollar. So
what they were paying before.
Or what they were paying before for the Heineken Cup. No, exactly. So the amount of money coming into the game is not what everyone predicted. I mean, you can just see. I mean, already you've had the RFU sack 64 people, I think it was last year. Sorry, make redundant, not sack. Let's be nice. Let's be use the right terminology. Because they basically have got a lot less cash coming in than they expected. So I think all of the unions up in Europe they've projected X amount of sponsorship. Now, whether that's Six Nations sponsorship or whether that's shirt deals or whatever, and they found actually that the market's a lot softer than they expected, and they're all got less cash coming in than they predicted.
I suppose what I fail to understand in this, and it's probably naivety in a way, is that we're in the middle of the Six Nations, and you see the way the Cardiff was rocking for the England game a couple of weeks ago, and we seen obviously the way Dublin was for the New Zealand game. We seen what New Zealand was like when the Lions were there, and we know that to rugby fans all around the world in all of these top tier countries that are trying to be protected here, that international rugby is the be all and end all. It's what brings in the fans. What I fail to understand is how the club game, which is nowhere near as popular and doesn't bring in the same amount of people through the gates at least, generates seemingly so much more money than the international game.
Does it generate it, or do you just spend it?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So if it is just a case of spending it, then surely it's not sustainable, and this is a short-term problem, if you know what I mean.
It is, but I think the reason I think that sort of put a rocket under this suddenly over the last 3 or 4 weeks is this venture capitalist group CVC. Now they've walked in and obviously have already done a deal with Gallagher Premiership to give them a bunch of cash. Now I'm a bit worried that basically all they're going to do there is just spend it on player wages and just burn it away. So we'll see what happens with that one, but that's I just don't trust that the Gallagher, that outside of Exeter Chiefs, they all make a loss, and they're going to continue making a loss. Now the next stage is that CVC is apparently talking to Six Nations and the Pro 14. Now if they get some sort of ownership in those two as well, then it all becomes like, okay, is Europe really going to suddenly change the landscape and just ignore World Rugby? And so I think World Rugby is scrambling to get, or World Rugby as in the New Zealand or the Sanzar countries are scrambling to get something in place before CVC buys up the Six Nations and the Pro 14, which would then basically shut them out.
Paul, I think when the initial proposal leaked, a lot of it was why this was a bad thing, and you kind of delved into the reason that it actually was proposed in the first place. And I'm wondering, from your own perspective, is there a potential solution that would satisfy this financial demand that rugby unions now found themselves in, while also satisfying kind of the progression and development of rugby as a whole?
Tough question. Fix it all for us, Paul, will you?
Simple answer: no, probably not. I think there's also. I think Augustin Pichot is what wants to have a fight with the clubs. I think he wants to get. Look, at the moment, the vast majority of the money, as we say, is raised by the international game, and the RFU gives a whole bunch of that back to the clubs to be able to try and keep them afloat and not totally sink. So why is the tail wagging the dog? Why is the bit that's spending all the money telling the bit that earns all the money what to do? Now, I mean, there's an exception in France, obviously, with the clubs there, but but even so, the French Rugby Union still gives the French clubs a lot of cash. So I think there's an element here of also trying to wrestle back control. So I think Augustin Pichot would like to go to war with the clubs. I'm not sure that he has the rest of the World Rugby behind him wanting to do the same sort of thing. So I think there's an element of that in there. There's a bit of conflict in World Rugby at the moment as to how much do we try and fight with the clubs and how much do we try and work with the clubs. And I think we're seeing that come through as well. They're not talking with one voice. But no, I think unless you get to the Irish model where you get some sort of central control, I can't see how the English model ever is financially viable.
It's very interesting you bring up Pichot there, because, as I said, in the kind of, as I was saying to Maurice, it was like the original news almost kind of passed by, and what came out was the outrage that followed. And within that outrage, I've seen a lot of people pointing to Pichot as somebody who, like, was almost talked about as having betrayed the likes of Uruguay, like his neighbour in Argentina, and Georgia and the lower nations, as being someone who went, made deals with them, talked to them about how they were going to be part of this, and ultimately then looked to close them out. But we were talking earlier, like that isn't necessarily the what's actually happening here. Is that what's being proposed or what was leaked may just be one of many proposals.
Yeah, I don't think it's the final one, but and something we talked about just before in our kind of pre-show chat was that it's interesting where it got leaked. This didn't come out through the Daily Mail, which a lot of things are being leaked through all the times. This came out through New Zealand Herald. So it came out in the middle of the night when Europe was asleep, when Dublin wasn't ready, so World Rugby in Dublin wasn't ready to react. It had an awful lot of momentum when they woke up already, and they walked into a firestorm. Now they brought this on themselves, to be honest, because they've run an opaque process behind closed doors. And if you do that, you're opening yourself up to self-interest leaks and rumours. And what I think we've got here is a self-interest leak that someone has gone, I don't like where this is going, therefore I'm going to leak it and get public opinion on my side. Now, this is all conjecture, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was New Zealand rugby as it came out in New Zealand.
Okay.
So you see, you've got countries like New Zealand, Australia, also got a lot of flack saying, oh, they've gone and their neighbours, they've gone and sold them down the street, and they've come out very quickly and said, no, we don't endorse this solution. We've obviously had Augustin Pichot come out and say, I don't endorse the solution. We've had Beaumont, we've had who's the CEO? I've gone blank now.
Come
out, and they've all kind of said they don't support this. So yeah, it's very very interesting who's talked and who's stayed silent, because I don't think any of the Six Nation countries have said anything officially.
A strategic leak at the right time will actually, as we've known in politics for a long, long time, will actually crush an idea, I suppose, at the source. Yeah.
So I think there's that going on. And there's also an interesting dynamic going on in England at the moment as well, because there's been a couple of recent articles come out in favour of ring fencing that have cherry picked some facts. They've gone, oh look, Ireland does well with the with ring fencing. And so did Wales internationally. And look how Ireland do in the European Rugby Champions Cup. But they cherry pick the ring fencing and they ignore all of the sort of resting of players, the controllers to in Ireland you can only have one foreign player per position, and all these other rules. They just go, oh yes, it must be ring fencing. It can't have anything to do with anything else. So that'll fix English woes. It's like, geez, no. So there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment, and I think a few paid for articles maybe here and there.
Yeah.
To go back to the lower tiers for a minute, like the idea of this proposal is surely to assist in terms of the established tiers for their income. And I'm wondering, for the likes of Georgia, who've come out since and have kind of publicly said that we need games to develop income, is there any solution that could incorporate them? Like, for example, could you, within this, have a viable solution where there would be a playoff for the Six Nations, and then you kind of satisfy both kind of parties within this from a development perspective?
It's fun, isn't it? We look at this thing, we talk about, it's when this new one was about, it's Southern Hemisphere versus Northern Hemisphere split and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, no, it's not. It's Europe versus non-Europe, because USA are in the Northern Hemisphere, so are Japan. So I don't know if you saw, there was a clip. There was a Major League Rugby game at the weekend, and you've got one game in lovely sunshine down in the southern states, and then you've got another game in Utah played in snow, and you're kind of like, okay, we've got one in 30 degrees heat and one in snow, so in the same league. So to try and say that they should play at the same time as the Southern Hemisphere, does that work? I don't know. So we're definitely dealing with some very if we were to start everything from scratch, I don't think we'd even have the Six Nations, let's be honest. But it's such a great tournament, we don't want to get rid of it. I'll be honest, I'm not a pro-Georgia person. I think Georgia actually need to beat a Tier 1 nation at least once in their life before they can actually claim to need Six Nations level. Fiji have beaten Tier 1 nations. Japan have. Even the USA beat Scotland last summer. Georgia has never in their history beaten a Tier 1 nation, and they're ranking above. They lost to Italy in November.
Yeah.
Now, so I think they've had their playoff. They lost it, and okay, it wasn't an official one. But yeah, we do need a pathway of some sort to say, how do Tier 2 nations become Tier 1 nations?
Yeah.
And at the moment, there is no pathway. There is no way they can actually ever progress. So we need a pathway of some sort in place. Now, how that works, whether you have a playoff or whether you have automatic promotion relegation, the problem with that obviously is your TV deals. If you sign a 6-year TV deal and then Scotland gets relegated, then how do you do that? I mean, for example, the Gallagher Premiership or the Aviva Premiership at the time had a deal to go over to the States and play a game in the USA for 3 years with London Irish, and then London Irish got relegated, and it was like, oops, okay, well that's out the door then. So you have you put all these commercials in place, and then you find suddenly they've gone. How do I now fund this, or how do I now sort things out? It's not like a domestic league where it doesn't matter if I don't know, if Man United or Man City are in the league. There's still people in the UK. It's still the same TV audience, so your commercials are fine. But if you're when you're talking internationally, it becomes a different ballgame entirely. So, but yeah, there needs to be a pathway for Tier 2 nations to become Tier 1 nations.
Lastly, just on ring fencing, on that pathway not existing at the moment, if this was to come to fruition, and be it Fiji or the USA or whoever it might be, but it is ultimately a closed shop, you might not know this, and we certainly don't, but we were speculating earlier, like, does this leave World Rugby open to like a legal challenge? I just don't know what their footing is on this, of just to say, right, this is us. I know we talked a little bit about, you know, the ICC doing it in cricket, and, you know, the Champions Trophy, which I don't think is what it was, but, you know, that was almost a, you know, we're just going to have our own tournament. We don't need the likes of Ireland and Scotland and Netherlands coming in and getting hammered in a World Cup. You know, it's not as important. But I can't imagine that it's very legally sound to just say, right, here are the teams, they're all there to make money, and you on the outside are never getting in.
I think legally they can do, if they get enough votes by in the council, they can do what they like. That's I don't think that legally they have to do that. I think we're already seeing a resurgence in interest in, I call it club rugby, but grassroots rugby, because here in New Zealand, we've seen it in Australia with resurgence in the Shoot Shield, and so we're talking about the level now, not the level of Super Rugby, not the level of Mitre 10 Cup, but the level beneath that. And people are getting more interested in that level of rugby. So I think people might switch off from professional rugby and become more interested in grassroots if they ring fenced it and people saw it as being unfair.
Well, it's interesting. Before we let you go, actually, we were going to talk a little bit about the Crusaders and our own Ronan O'Gara over there, and, you know, from what we're hearing, making waves, and, you know, there was even an article last week about him possibly joining the next All Blacks coaching team. How are things going for O'Gara over there?
He's doing very well. He's obviously in a very he's joined a very successful setup. He's fitted in very well. And yeah, he seems to be enjoying it, and they seem to be enjoying him. So that all looks good. As far as him joining the All Blacks setup, I think that was him fishing rather than, to be honest. If I were the All Blacks, would I want to invite? If I was New Zealand Rugby, would I want to invite in the future Ireland head coach to come in and and learn all our secrets before going back to Ireland? I think not. So
this is a professional you're talking about, Paul. How dare you question his motives?
Oh, no, come on. No, his motives are about being as good as he can be. Don't get me wrong. So that's absolutely fine. But yeah, no, as a New Zealand Rugby, I would not want to sell my secret sauce like that. So maybe as head coach of the Crusaders.
Something we talked about, actually, yeah, because the promotion system might leave a spot open there next season.
It could be. I can't see. I don't think. I think Razor will still be there. Razor. I think Razor's younger than I am. So he has got plenty of years left in him to get to this. If he got the New Zealand job, he'd be in it for like 20 years. The guy is. Yeah. So I think it's a bit early for him to get there and then go, well, I've done everything I need to do by the age of 40. Yeah. What do I do with the rest of my life, kind of thing. So. So give him another World Cup cycle at the Crusaders. Personally, I think so. I don't think he'll get. I don't think he'll get it. Ian Foster, the incumbent, will get it.
Sure. That's definitely the thought process. Well, listen, Paul, thanks so much for joining us. It was great talking to you. People can read your work on at Driving Mall on Twitter and various places around the internet. Has said that the place that is the World League worth it is definitely worth a shout on therunnersports.com. Really good explainer as to everything that's going on here. But thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, hopefully I'll be back soon. Great
stuff. Thanks so much, Paul. Look, we'll talk about this again. I think we're going to probably try and touch base with the Pacific Islanders, but it's a whole mess that we'll get into again, because I don't think this is a 1 week story, really, unfortunately. But we do have to move on now because the Six Nations is back this weekend. It's the final run now. We've got the 2 weekends in a row. Ireland have 2 games in 6 days to turn around our season heading into the World Cup. Would you believe we'd been saying that a month ago? But France coming to town, and Ireland didn't play well against them last year. Let's not forget, in our borderline perfect 2018, the worst performance was probably against France in that first match in the Six Nations, and we were rescued by a miracle drop goal. But things are a little bit different now, and we did beat them quite handily. Maybe I think it was 19-9 in the Aviva. I was at that game a couple of years ago, and I remember it was just like a solid, fairly easy win for Ireland. Like, as always, in control, just about got the job done, did everything they needed to do. So it'll be good to get a win back under at home, given what happened when England came to town a couple of months ago, or about a month ago now. But Ireland haven't been playing well. We've talked about it ad nauseum, at length. You've been having a look at Joe Schmidt's options this week, and you're going to pick the team you would like to see, not necessarily the team he will pick. It's not a prediction. What have you gone with?
Yeah, so we're doing this team on Tuesday, so we don't have a full squad date about certain players, are they fit or not, but this is based off the assumption that they will be fit.
Yeah.
So for the back three, Rob Kearney, a fullback, Keith Ayres and Jacob Stockdale on the wings. There's no great surprises there.
Nope.
In the centre, I think Gary Ringrose and Robbie Henshaw should start. It's probably our best centre partnership. Bundyaki took his head knock against Italy. In lieu of that, I think you give the two of them as much game time as possible together. Yeah. And with Ringrose, we think Ringrose will be back. It looks like he will. I think Henshaw is back training today, building up towards Friday. So the two of them together, I think, is what you go with there. Sexton and Murray, again, I don't think there's any great need to elaborate on that. Okay, so just to clarify this before I get into it, the back three, we think CJ Sander and Dan Levy will be back fit. If they are, I think they should both commit to the team. One of Ireland's main, what they want is not necessarily quick ball, but control of their own ball, and they're losing the breakdown battle. That hasn't been something that's gone well for us, and a guy like Dan Levy nearly guarantees that. So in this scenario, I know, like, you might talk about fitness and stuff, he's demonstrated in the past that he can come back in off injury and slot straight away in. And based off that, I think because of the struggle that we've had there, that I know that's harsh on Sean O'Brien, but I genuinely believe that given what Dan Levy offers there, it's like another dimension to a 7 in terms of what he does the breakdown. And then somebody like CJ Sander, when we're struggling with go forward ball already, we've seen the carries to meters ratios of some players this year has been kind of appalling. So the two of them, I think, in these circumstances, are two that you do bring back in.
O'Brien as the back row replacement?
Exactly.
Okay,
yeah. Second, this is another big call, but on that team, on the breakdown, I think James Ryan will obviously start. I think Ty Burns should start with him. Ian Henderson probably will, I would imagine. Yeah. But in terms of what Ty Burns offers there's not a better poacher in Europe in terms of what he does as a jackal and his ability. So if we are looking to control our own possession, and we could starve them of it by his ability to jackal, and France are so erratic in terms of their commitments to breakdowns. Like, sometimes they might have 4 at a ruck, other time it might only be 1, and his timing is so impeccable based off that him with O'Mahony could pose real questions defensively of France. So I think come back in. The only problem then is if he does come back in, and he won't come back in, but if he did, who would call the lineouts? Because that would probably put the onus on, like, so Quinn Roux was doing it, and then Devin Toner was doing it. I don't think
you're saying Quinn Roux there, like, he has no chance of starting. If the team comes out on Friday and Quinn Roux is named alongside James Ryan, I won't be one bit surprised. Yeah. Not one bit surprised. Just given his performances the last couple of days, he's the man with the shirt. Joe seems to have a hierarchy. You would have thought Henderson would come in and play against Italy on his first game back. You would have thought Byrne would be promoted. He went with Roux and Delan, who were the next two down before those two got injured, once he gave James Ryan the rest. I just wouldn't be surprised now at all. And in fairness to Quinn Roux, he has played well. He's not going to give you the dynamism of those other two players, but he can call a line out, and we don't have Devin Toner there, and we've seen what's happened when Ireland haven't had that line out general, I suppose, for want of a better word, in the past.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think Quinn Roux is definitely underappreciated in a lot of ways in terms of what he does at the breakdown, and also just like really simple things like controlling a maul or even countering a maul, that kind of benign, but a lock's bread and butter. He offers a lot in that regard. I just think that given the issues that Ireland Rugby has going into this game, that somebody like Terry Byrne is worth kind of like, I don't think you're sacrificing anything by including Ryan in a lineout, but I do think you're sacrificing stuff elsewhere by not playing him in the team, which I guess is. But
Burn, you mean?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. I'm more kind of changing it, going from your opinion to
a prediction
in a way. I wouldn't predict that he's going to play, but it's not going to surprise me in the least, you know. But I think the whole country wants to see Tyke Byrne starting for Ireland at this stage. He's been man of the match in nearly every Munster game he's played this year. I think it's unfortunate for Henderson, who's kind of waited patiently for his turn for a long time, and then James Ryan comes out of nowhere, and now Tyke Byrne's come out of nowhere. But at the same time, he's the player in form, and is the player that I think would want to see there.
I think you just go back to your number front row of Tyke Furlong, Roy Best, and Cian Healy. So the backup for them would be Kilcoyne, Scannell, I think, and Porter. Henderson, O'Brien, Cooney, Carty, and Larmour. So the rest of those.
So Sean Cronin is missing out.
Yeah, I think he'll pay. He'll pay because of what happens last time out. It's funny. I was reading. Paul O'Connell gave an interview in the Sunday Independent where he spoke about the idea of a lineout. It's only a lock who will realise that it's not the hooker's fault, like somebody else is missing their cue or it's being badly called. So you saw that, we spoke about this last week, the amount of times they threw to Peter O'Mahony in the second half, the amount of times that Furlong was lifting in the first. You go back to your kind of reliances to try and steady ship. But in saying that, I just think that Cronin has had 2 starts for Ireland in the last year, and both times he hasn't performed. And a man as ruthless as Joe Schmidt, I actually think it's probably fair enough that, like, I'm a huge Sean Cronin fan. I think he's been amazing for Leinster this year, but I think Scannell probably is worthy of his chance there, and you can't afford that kind of inaccuracy in a lineup right now.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think we'll beat France?
Yeah, I do.
At least bring it to Cardiff then with a chance.
I do. I think France on the road are a different proposition to the France we've had there. I also think the French tendency to kind of fade that we've seen recently, especially against Wales, will really suit Ireland, the team that generally have fought back into games like they did against Italy last week, that have demonstrated their kind of phenomenal fitness already. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's competitive for the first half, but as the second half goes on, I would expect Ireland to cut a bit loose.
So it'll give us a story going into Cardiff at least, but is the main story going to be Wales fighting for a Grand Slam? They have to go to Edinburgh. It's not always been the easiest place for them to go. It's a great occasion always. There's something just really, really 5/6 nations that defining about Wales versus Scotland for me anyway, especially in Murrayfield with the anthems and everything. But Scotland have been so poor, and it's like getting worse as the tournament goes on as well. They can't do anything.
I don't see how they recover from the main difficulty for Scotland was the amount of injuries they were hit with at the start of the tournament to really key players, and the likes of, you know, Denton and Hamish Watson, and these players haven't come back yet.
Yeah,
so
Hogg, of course.
One
of the best players in the world. Yeah.
So based off that, I know Finn Russell played at the weekend, so he's back, which is massive for them. I think Hastings looked good off the bench, so if he didn't start, they'd probably hit him. But that kind of stuff is big. But I would still fully expect Wales to. I still think they're going to win the Grand Slam. I mean, I just don't see.
You don't see us beating them either, even, yeah?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I don't know. Like that last game would be a thriller if it does come to that. Yeah. I think it'd come down to fine margins. But I think this has been a Grand Slam has been something that Gatland has earmarked from a long way out. And he even said it himself that if they beat France, that they'd probably set it up. And I would kind of lean towards them doing that, yeah. Okay,
and finally, what amazing plan will Conor O'Shea have waiting for his trip to Twickenham this time?
Yeah, I can't wait.
You honestly think he's going to come up with something, don't you?
It might be something very, very subtle, but there will be.
I hope it's not subtle. I hope it's completely game changing and the whole Twitter explodes.
I'm becoming more and more convinced of this. That
he's going to play the backs and the forwards, and the forwards and the backs.
I'm becoming more and more convinced of the idea that he's altering really, really slowly game on game. Like I actually think that he against Ireland decided that he was going to put nobody into rucks, and that's why their 9 Tabali was able to steal through Murray, because there was nobody in his way. You know, he just ran through and just able to pickpocket him like that. Because I fully believe that he's doing some kind of variations game on game. I don't have enough evidence to prove that point, but this weekend I think we'll see something definitely. Yeah,
and they'll lose by 25 points if they're lucky. But that's just because England are going to take it out on Italy and Scotland, what happened to them in Cardiff, I think.
And also, I
I
think England are very conscious. I mean, they're obviously very conscious that they need bonus point wins to try and secure the tournament right now.
Yeah, if Ireland can do a job in Cardiff. That's it. But there is actually that's it for the senior men's Six Nations. But the Ireland under-20s are the team that we should nearly be watching at the moment, and we'll have someone down there on Friday night in Cork, because I was there for the England game and it was an amazing occasion as well. And that's just something that if they get the same kind of crowd out there this time and they're 3 for 3, there's a real chance of a Grand Slam in this team. I think they'll beat France on Friday night and go over to Cardiff it won't be in Cardiff, go over to Wales to win that Grand Slam would be an amazing achievement. But they're a team worth watching. It's on TV on Friday night, and if you can watch it, there are players there that you'll remember and you'll be talking about in 2 or 3 years, because that's a good team.
Yeah, big time. And even I was just looking at it last weekend, like you got like Sean French, who is racking up tries in the AIL and is not starting he came on, I know, and was really impressive that night down in Cork actually when he came on at the end there. But like there's a host of players here who you will one day say, oh, I remember watching him play in under-20s.
Yeah.
And that even, I mean, without putting focus on players, you've also got an up-and-coming coaching panel who are very highly regarded. A guy like Noel McNamara, who did really impressive stuff at Leinster, but there in terms of player development, McFarland, who, by the way, scored a sensational try yesterday against Fiji. I feel like two sidesteps
for the Scotland Sevens
try, in Las Vegas, as he mentioned to us. That's worldwide checking out. It was amazing. Like 2 sidesteps, field length try, basically fell over his own try length at the other end of the field. He was so tired, but it was just when we spoke about this guy having pace, this is the first time where you fully learned to appreciate it.
We'll tweet out a link after the show, and you can check it on Balls.ie, because if you can get that try, but I haven't seen that. I definitely want to see Max in action. The one that got away for Irish Sevens rugby, but. Sure, good luck to Scotland and their rise to the Sevens ranks thanks to their sneaky little Irish winger, Max McFarland. That's great news. So best luck to the Ireland under-20s and indeed even the Irish senior teams, and of course the Irish women as well, all taking on France this weekend. And good luck to everybody playing the great worldwide game of rugby, which will soon only be 12 countries, not including the 12 best teams, once World Rugby has their way. But we'll talk about that again. Next time. We'll talk to you next Tuesday when we'll be reflecting on the weekend Six Nations. Talk to you then.